This module explains how multilateral institutions can report on TOSSD. If you have never heard about the new statistical measurement system TOSSD, you can also have a look at our introduction module that you can find on the TOSSD website, tossd.org. This module is divided into 6 sections. Section 1 introduces you to the reporting more generally. Section 2 presents the main concepts and definitions used in the TOSSD statistical system. Section 3 presents the 2 pillars included in TOSSD. Pillar 1 on cross-border resource flows in support of sustainable development, and Pillar 2 on regional and global expenditures in support of sustainable development. Section 4 presents the simplified reporting form that has been developed specifically for multilateral institutions and that can be used to report both on TOSSD and to the creditor reporting system for those of you who already report to the CRS. Section 5 explains how to find additional TOSSD activities that are not reportable in the creditor reporting system. And finally, Section 6 summarizes the main key points. This module will explain multilateral institutions how to report TOSSD data. At the end of the seminar, the trainee will be able to fill the CRS TOSSD template and identify additional activities that are not ODA eligible but can be counted in TOSSD. This section will introduce you to the reporting. Every year, the TOSSD Secretariat collects data on resources provided in the previous year by bilateral and multilateral providers. For example, in 2021, the Secretariat collects data on 2020 expenditures. The deadline for Pillar 1 data submission is on 31 July. For Pillar 2, the deadline is a little later on 1st October. The TOSSD Secretariat will validate the data by 30 November and publish the data in December. Reporters should provide TOSSD data at activity level, and in principle, the objective is to make all data publicly available also at activity level. The objective of the reporting process is to have a TOSSD reporting form filled with all your sustainable development activities. To do this, use the TOSSD data form and codes lists. The TOSSD data form includes 28 items. It also includes examples to guide the reporter and a separate tab for the reporter to provide supplementary data on private finance mobilized. The goal is to fill in this Excel file. The TOSSD codes list will help you fill in the TOSSD data form. The file contains all the classifications and associated codes for reporting on TOSSD, for example, classifications on sectors, financial instruments, etc. You can find the respective links for both documents on the slide. Please click on it to download them. The key reference documents that you will need to use for your TOSSD reporting are the reporting instructions and the explanatory notes. The TOSSD reporting instructions is the main document that includes all the statistical concepts and criteria. The explanatory notes for reporters provide key explanations for reporting on TOSSD that are tailored for specific groups of reporters. Please consult the reporting instructions and explanatory notes when reporting TOSSD data. You can find the respective links for both documents on the slide. Please click on it to download them. There is also a web tool to guide you through the TOSSD reporting. It will guide you step by step on how to record project information in the TOSSD form, providing indications field by field. With this tool, you will not need to send an Excel file, as the data will be sent directly to the TOSSD Secretariat. The tool is recommended for a country or institution with a maximum of 100 activities. Please send an email to tossd.contact@oecd.org if you wish to get the link to the web tool. This section will take you through the main concepts and definitions of the TOSSD statistical framework. All information can also be found in Chapter 1 of the TOSSD reporting instructions. So what is TOSSD? TOSSD is a new statistical measure that provides a complete picture of all official resources in support of sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals. If you wonder what private finance mobilized by official interventions is, these are private resources that would not have been invested in sustainable development without an official intervention, for example through guarantees. In this slide, you can see a general presentation of the TOSSD framework, which again aims to measure official resources in support of sustainable development. The first question is, who are the TOSSD reporters? TOSSD reporters include bilateral providers, including both traditional and southern providers, but also multilateral providers, which include Multilateral Development Bank, UN entities, and other multilateral organizations. What are the resources that are captured in TOSSD? There is, of course, first official development assistance flows, but we also have other official flows, South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation, spending for international public goods, and private finance mobilized by official intervention. The boxes that you see highlighted in blue are those that are only partially captured today in international statistics. So an important element of the TOSSD framework is the sustainability test. Only activities that are considered sustainable are included in the framework. And in the right of your slide, you can see how the TOSSD framework is itself built. So you have Pillar 1 on cross-border flows to TOSSD eligible countries, and Pillar 2 on global and regional expenditures for international public goods. And private finance mobilized is an extension of the two pillars. How is the concept of sustainability defined in TOSSD? First of all, the TOSSD statistical framework assumes that all resources captured should be provided consistent with prevailing global and regional economic, environmental, and social standards and disciplines, with development cooperation effectiveness principles, as well as with the United Nations Charter and international law. Secondly, sustainable development is defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition is inspired by the Brundtland report, which is often used as a reference in the field. In addition, sustainable development in the TOSSD context is inherently linked to the Sustainable Development Goals and the three dimensions of sustainability as agreed in the 2030 Agenda. These dimensions include generating sustainable economic growth, ensuring social inclusion without compromising the environment. In more practical terms, and this is maybe the most important aspect of the TOSSD sustainability definition, an activity is deemed to support sustainable development if it directly contributes to at least one of the SDG targets, and if no substantial detrimental effect is anticipated on one or more of the other targets. How are the terms resources and officially supported defined in TOSSD? First of all, TOSSD aims to capture the entirety of instruments and modalities used by official providers to support sustainable development. This includes mechanisms to mobilize resources from the private sector. In accordance with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the term resources in the TOSSD definition covers both financial and technical resources. Therefore, in the context of TOSSD, officially supported resources are defined as follows. First, resources provided by official agencies, including state and local governments or their executive agencies, as well as resources provided by public sector corporations. Secondly, officially supported resources include also private resources mobilized by official interventions, where a direct causal link between the official intervention and the private resources can be demonstrated. How are the terms international public goods, global challenges, and development enablers defined? International public goods are goods which provide benefits that are non-exclusive and available for all to consume in at least two countries. The term good refers to resources, products, services, institutions, policies, and conditions. International public goods include both regional public goods and global public goods. Global challenges are issues or concerns that bring this utility on a global scale and that need to be addressed globally. There is a significant overlap between international public goods and global challenges. Global challenges are often the opposite of international public goods, for example, climate change being the opposite of stable climate. However, not all activities addressing global challenges are international public goods. Development enablers are the means that help provide international public goods and/or address global challenges. They often have the characteristics of international public goods. They can be seen as intermediate international public goods as opposed to final international public goods. TOSSD is an international statistical framework and therefore needs to follow internationally agreed statistical principles. Data collected on TOSSD should comply with the United Nations fundamental principle of official statistics. Moreover, the TOSSD statistical framework is subject to the United Nations Statistics Quality Assurance Framework. TOSSD will ensure in particular the quality of the statistical output, for example, the relevance, coherence, accuracy, reliability, timeliness, interpretability, and accessibility of the statistical output. Secondly, TOSSD will also ensure the quality of the statistical processes, in particular through the development of sound methods, cost efficiency, and non-excessive burden on reporters. And finally, TOSSD will also ensure the quality of the institutional environment, in particular to ensure that there is objectivity, impartiality, transparency, and credibility in the TOSSD data. And this is, of course, essential to build trust, which is the very foundation of a statistical system. What is the point of measurement in TOSSD? The main TOSSD measure is calculated on a gross disbursement basis. This is because gross figures reveal the full scope and nature of external resources provided for sustainable development. The net measure will also be calculated for transparency and analytical purposes based on information reported on reflows. TOSSD data are reported in the currency in which the transaction takes place. However, to be comparable, they need to be presented in the same unit of measurement. That unit of measurement is the United States dollar. Data reported in currencies other than USD will be converted to USD using annual average exchange rate. This section will explain the two pillars of TOSSD. All information can also be found in chapters 2 and 3 of the TOSSD reporting instructions. The first pillar of TOSSD tracks cross-border resource flows extended by bilateral and multilateral providers in support of sustainable development in TOSSD-eligible recipients. The major breakdown is between grants and in-kind contributions on the one hand and financial transactions on the other hand. Both concessional and non-concessional transactions are captured, but they are separately identified. In addition, resources mobilized from the private sector by official interventions are also captured. However, they are presented under a separate heading as the funds do not necessarily originate from the provider country and may even be domestic, meaning that they originate from the recipient country. In this slide, you can see the main categories of resources included in Pillar 1. The first category is, of course, grants, which can be provided either in monetary terms or in kind, for example, through technical assistance. The second main category is financial transactions, which include debt instruments and equity investments. Together, these two categories, grants and financial transactions, represent total official flows. In addition to total official flows, TOSSD Pillar 1 captures also resources mobilized from the private sector through official interventions, regardless of the country of origin of the funds mobilized. What does TOSSD eligible countries mean? To count as TOSSD Pillar 1, an activity should involve a cross-border resource flow to a country on the list of TOSSD eligible recipient countries. For any reporting year, this list includes all countries and territories that are present on the tag list of ODA recipients. In addition, other countries and territories that have activated the TOSSD opt-in procedure can also be added to the list. Any country or territory can activate the opt-in procedure at any point in time. The procedure is voluntary but needs to be motivated through the specific economic, social, or environmental context that the country faces. Traditional donors are expected to not use the TOSSD opt-in procedure. How are resource flows in support of sustainable development reported in TOSSD in comparison with ODA? First of all, if we look at all the flows from provider countries, we have first purely bilateral flows from the provider country directly to the recipient country. This is shown in the A1 green arrow. Then we have contributions that are earmarked through the multilateral system. This is shown in the A2 blue arrow. Earmarked means that the multilateral institution implements the project, but the provider country keeps a significant degree of control over the funds. Then we have an earmarked core contributions to multilateral agencies. This is shown in the A3 red arrow. Then if we look at the outflows from multilateral agencies, we have multilateral outflows from their non-core resources. This is the B1 continuation of the blue arrow. And then we have outflows from core resources of multilateral agencies. This is the B2 arrow. So in ODA, because ODA is primarily focused on donor country effort, in ODA, countries report on A1, A2, and A3. And to complement information on resources to developing countries in the CRS system, multilateral institutions report on B2, only on their core resources. However, given that TOSSD is primarily focused on the recipient perspective, countries report only on A1 in TOSSD, and multilateral institutions report both on B1 and B2. The reason is that multilateral institutions very often have a much better and more granular level of information when they report both B1 and B2. In practice, bilateral providers are still expected to report all activities channeled through international organizations in TOSSD, whether core or earmarked contributions. It is very important that you indicate the right modality for these activities, which should be one of the following. B01 for core support to NGOs, other private bodies, public-private partnerships, and research institutes. B02 for core contributions to multilateral organizations, and B03 for earmarked contributions to implementing partners or contributions to specific purpose programs and funds. Data will be useful for checking purposes and to inform the Secretariat about relevant international organizations to approach for collecting TOSSD data in future data collection rounds. In addition, if a given organization does not report in TOSSD, bilateral contributions to this organization will be used instead and included in the TOSSD data. TOSSD Pillar 2 captures resources to support international public goods that are necessary for the achievement of the SDGs and to address global challenges, for example, climate change mitigation. It includes resources deployed at the international, global or regional, or domestic level and whose benefits are of transnational reach. This includes, for example, activities of multilateral, global and regional institutions that promote international cooperation for sustainable development, for example, through norm setting, international oversight, knowledge generation and dissemination. TOSSD Pillar 2 also captures certain expenditures incurred by providers in their own countries or in non-TOSSD eligible countries, for example, R&D or support to refugees. There are specific eligibility criteria for TOSSD Pillar 2. As any other TOSSD activity, a Pillar 2 activity is deemed to support sustainable development if it meets the criteria regarding sustainable development defined in Chapter 1 of the reporting instructions. In addition, for including an activity in TOSSD Pillar 2, it needs to provide substantial benefits to TOSSD eligible countries or their populations, and or be implemented in direct cooperation with TOSSD eligible countries or with private or public institutions from these countries as a means of ensuring the benefit to TOSSD eligible countries or their populations. An example of in cooperation with TOSSD eligible countries is, for example, in the case of multilateral institution, an organization where TOSSD eligible countries are members of that organization. So it can be assumed that the activities carried out by this organization are carried out in cooperation with TOSSD eligible countries. Now, what about the delineation between TOSSD Pillar 1 and TOSSD Pillar 2? Cross-border flows to recipient countries can also support international public goods or development enablers or address global challenges, which means that they could in principle be included in the two pillars of TOSSD. However, given that the key objective of TOSSD is to enhance transparency on external finance for sustainable development provided to recipient countries, such activities will be categorized in Pillar 1. When the provider first commits funds to a regional program and decides on their allocation by country only at a later stage, both the original regional commitment and the subsequent disbursements by country should be reported in Pillar 1. Multi-country activities, meaning activities that result in cross-border flows to several countries belonging to the same region, are also reported in Pillar 1 using regional recipient codes. How to classify regional activities in the two pillars of TOSSD. As mentioned in the previous slide, multi-country activities are included in Pillar 1. So projects implemented in multiple recipient countries with resource transfers to these countries, including on regional public goods, are reported in Pillar 1 using regional recipient codes. You can use the recipient code developing countries unspecified if the targeted countries do not belong to the same region. Examples of such projects include community protection and resilience activity in Central Africa, or solar light for all in rural Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. From the title of these activities, it can be assumed that the activities will actually take place in these countries with resource transfers to each of these countries. An example for activities that could be considered as a regional public good but still reported in Pillar 1 because there would be a cross-border transfer of resources to multiple countries is the Euromed Road, Rail and Urban Transport Project. This infrastructure project could be considered a regional public good, but since it's a cross-border flow of resources, it would be reported in Pillar 1. A final example for multi-region activities is the scaling up of disaster risk reduction and adaptation in Morocco, Burkina Faso, and Bangladesh. Regional projects that are more aimed at cooperating at the international level and that are implemented at the level of a global or regional institution should be classified in TOSSD Pillar 2 since there is no direct resource transfer to individual countries. Examples of such projects are the African Human Development Report, produced by UNDP, the Organization of American States Cooperation Plan and Monitoring, or support to the African Tax Administration Forum. All these projects are implemented at the international level, and the objective is to cooperate at the international level with no direct resource transfers to the countries that are included in these regions. So that's why they are included in Pillar 2 rather than Pillar 1. This section will present the simplified reporting form that has been developed specifically for multilateral institutions. A specific reporting format has been developed for multilateral institutions. The simplified reporting format has been adjusted to cover both the reporting to TOSSD and to the CRS, or the creditor reporting system. As you know, the TOSSD and the CRS are two different statistical systems which have some overlap in terms of activities covered, but also important differences in terms of scope. So the simplified reporting template excludes CRS fields that are not relevant to multilateral institutions. Let's start with what we call identification data. step is to fill in the identification data. These data include the reporting year, the provider institution, the provider agency, the provider project number, and the ID number. Please note that all stared items are mandatory. In the reporting year, you should include the calendar year for which data are reported. In the provider institution, you should include the unique code identifying your institution. Please consult the codes list to find which is the code for your institution. For UN entities, this item corresponds to the UN Data Standard 1. If you don't find a code for your institution, please indicate the name in letters. In the provider agency field, you should include a unique code identifying the agency within the provider country that has a budget, responsibility, and controls the activity for its own account. This item corresponds to the UN Data Standards 4, UN Grant Financing Instruments. In the provider project number field, please indicate your internal code based on which you identify the activity in your system. Leave empty if the project is not identified by a code in your systems at present. The field on ID number should be left empty, as the ID numbers are provided by the Secretariat. Let's move now to the basic data. A number of reporting items are grouped in what we call the basic data. These include the recipient, where you should indicate a unique code that identifies the country or region receiving the cross-border flow or benefiting from the in-kind contribution. In the project title field, you should provide a free text indicating the official project title in English, French, or Spanish. Some best practices for project titles. First, it is recommended that you do not provide titles with more than 150 characters. You should try to provide a clear and concise title within the limit, avoid unnecessary wording, and avoid repeating the name of the sector which is already provided in field 11. You can see here an example of good practice and an example of a project title that does not follow good practice. The basic data give also the possibility to provide more detailed information. In the project description field, you can enter a free text describing the activity, for example by describing its objectives, planned outputs, outcomes, and time frame. The text should be provided either in English or French. In the external link, you can include the digital object identifier or a link to a web page containing detailed information on the activity. Some best practices for the description field. You should first know that you should not provide description with more than 8,000 characters. The description includes everything that would allow the Secretariat to check the accuracy and consistency of the information provided in the other fields of the format, for example in the sector field. It should also allow to verify the eligibility of activities, for example whether they contribute to sustainable development. For multi-country projects, it should indicate the countries that are supported. Finally, the description goes hand in hand with the field 9 external link, which should point to additional information on the activity available online. An important and mandatory field is the SDG focus field. This item corresponds to the UN Data Standard 5 Sustainable Development Goals. Why is this field mandatory and important in the reporting? Because in TOSSD, only activities that support sustainable development are reportable. In TOSSD, an activity is deemed to support sustainable development if it directly contributes to at least one of the SDG targets and if no substantial detrimental effect is anticipated on one or more of the other targets. There may be cases where reporters cannot find a direct link with one of the SDG targets, and this may be due to the fact that SDG targets represent a global ambition and may therefore not encapsulate all dimensions of a given developmental issue in their final agreed wording. Therefore, if you cannot find a direct link to a target, you can still report the activity against the goal and provide an appropriate justification in the SDG level explanation field. How to report concretely on the SDG focus field. Please report the values separated by a semicolon. In case no direct link can be found to an SDG target, report the goal as X.0, for example 2.0 for goal 2, and we recommend to limit the SDGs to 10 targets or goals. Beyond the sustainability principle explained in the previous slide, there is currently no detailed guidance on how to apply and operationalize this principle in specific sectors. Therefore, the assessment of sustainability is currently made on a case-by-case basis, and examples of contentious areas and activities that were mentioned by some reporters include non-renewable and nuclear energy, mineral resources and mining, humanitarian assistance to local communities with an objective to create a more amicable environment to carry out military missions, contributions to NGOs that are primarily motivated by religious concerns, or petrochemical industry. These types of activities were generally not reported by providers, but in a few cases these activities were included as they were considered supporting sustainable development in the specific context of the recipient country receiving the support. The Secretariat and the TOSSD Task Force are currently discussing further operationalization of sustainability. Important field is the one related to the sector, as this is one of the most important pieces of information for data users. The sector identifies the specific area within the recipient's economic, social, or environmental architecture that the resource transfer fosters. Reporters can use either the CRS or ISIC classifications. Here an example of the CRS TOSSD classification in education. Reporters should use the 5-digit sector codes, for example, teacher training, education facilities, educational research, etc. This slide gives an overview of the broader sector categories that are included in the CRS classification. Beyond education, there are also sector categories on communication, agriculture, forestry, fishing, or disaster prevention and preparedness. As an alternative to the CRS classification, you can also use the ISIC classification. Here you can see an example of a category included in the ISIC classification, the one related to agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Reporters should use the 3-digit class codes. Here you can see the broader sector categories included in the ISIC classification, for example, on mining, manufacturing, information and communication, education, real estate activities, etc. An important information is the channel of delivery. The channel of delivery is the first implementing partner. It has implementing the responsibility over the funds and is normally accountable to the provider agency by a contract or other binding agreement. Where several levels of implementation are involved, report the first level of implementation as the channel of delivery. Here you can see the broad channel categories, which include public sector institutions, non-governmental organizations, public-private partnerships and networks, multilateral organizations, private sector institutions, and other channels. Within the broad channel categories, you have the possibility to use more granular channels. For example, within the recipient government categories, there is the possibility to use the channel for the central government, the channel for local government, a channel for public corporations, and channel for other public entities. The modality field describes the form in which the support is provided. These include, for example, budget support, core contributions to NGOs, core contributions to multilateral organizations, contributions to specific purpose programs and funds managed by implementing partners, or project-type interventions. There is also a field to inform the financial instrument used to provide the support. Financial instruments used in TOSSD include, for example, grants, a number of debt instruments such as standard loans, mezzanine finance instruments, debt relief, or guarantees and other funded contingent liabilities. The financing arrangement field identifies specific characteristics of the financial arrangement. In TOSSD, financial arrangements include blended finance, Islamic finance, co-financing arrangements involving recipient counterpart funds, and officially supported export credits. The framework of collaboration field describes the broad type of partnership under which the activity is carried out. These include South-South cooperation or triangular cooperation. Triangular cooperation involves a partnership among at least 3 partners, where the 3 main roles can be identified as follows. First, the beneficiary partner, which is an eligible country that requests support to tackle a specific development challenge. Then there is the pivotal partner that has relevant domestic experience in addressing the issue in a context similar to that of the beneficiary country, and that shares its financial resources, knowledge, and expertise to help others do the same. Then we have the facilitating partner that helps connect the other partners and support the partnerships financially and/or with technical expertise. The pivotal and facilitating partners each report on the resources they provide. In this slide, you can see a representation of the different partners participating in triangular cooperation, which again includes the beneficiary partner, the facilitating partner, and the pivotal partner. Let's move now to the volume data. The volume data include first the currency. Here you should provide the ISO code for the currency in which the transaction has been undertaken. If you don't find the code for your currency, please indicate the name in letters. In addition, you should provide the amount committed for your projects and activities. Here you should indicate the new amount committed contractually by the provider during the reporting year. A commitment is a firm written obligation by the provider, backed by the appropriation or availability of the necessary funds to provide specified resources under specified financial terms and conditions and for specified purposes for the benefit of the recipient. Commitments are considered to be made at the date the financial agreement is signed or the obligation is otherwise made known to the recipient. In addition to the amount committed, you should also provide data on the amount dispersed, or in other words, the actual expenditure by the provider during the reporting year. A disbursement is the placement of resources at the disposal of the recipient. In the reflows to the provider, you should provide data on the amount paid back to the provider during the reporting year, whether this is related to recoveries on grants, amortizations of loans, or gains and losses from equity sales. In the amounts mobilized field, you should provide data on the private resources mobilized by your interventions, where a causal link can be made between the provision of the private finance and the official intervention. In addition, for loans only, you should provide information on the concessionality of the loan, using a binary code yes or no. Concessionality in TOSSD is defined according to the IMF definition. To determine the concessionality of your loan, you can use the calculator provided by the IMF on the IMF website. In addition, for loans, you should also provide data on the maturity of the loan, which is defined as the interval in terms of number of months from the commitment date to the date of the last payment of the amortization. For mobilization data only, you should provide information on the leveraging mechanism. A specific list of leveraging mechanisms and corresponding codes is provided in the TOSSD codes list. For mobilization data, you should also provide information on the origin of the funds mobilized, and here again a specific list of codes is provided in the TOSSD codes list. A number of reporting items exist only in the CRS. This is particularly the case for climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation policy markers. In the fields related to climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, please report your contribution to these policy objectives using either the Rio markers methodology or the MDB's methodology based on climate components. If you report on mobilization, You should report the percentage of mitigation and adaptation overlap following the MDB methodology in the field for climate change overlap. The CRS includes also the possibility to report on the gender marker, which is voluntary but highly recommended. Please indicate 0 if gender equality is not a policy objective of the project. Indicate 1 if gender equality is a significant objective of the project. And indicate 2 if gender equality is the main objective of the project. For more information on the gender marker, please visit the link indicated on the slide. This section presents the types of additional activities that are not reportable in the CRS, but that you could report in TOSSD. There are two main categories of additional activities or expenditures that can be reported in TOSSD. First, there is the outflows from earmarked resources. In the CRS, multilateral institutions report only the outflows from their core or unearmarked resources. This is because the non-core resources are reported directly by donor countries. However, in TOSSD, multilateral institutions can report outflows from both their core and non-core resources. This means that the non-core resources are additional activities that multilateral institutions report in TOSSD. The other type of additional activities that multilateral institutions can report in TOSSD are those that are not eligible to ODA. If the main objective of the activity is not to support developing countries, then the activity is not eligible to ODA. However, this activity can still be reported in TOSSD if it supports sustainable development at the global or regional level. A typical example of such activities in the case of multilateral institutions is the global normative activities, for example, the international health regulations, which are focused on all countries and not necessarily and specifically on developing countries in particular. In principle, if your organization's ODA coefficient is lower than 100%, you should have additional activities to report in TOSSD, except from activities to high-income economies, which are not reportable in TOSSD. What are the key points that should be kept in mind following this training? First, the aim of the data collection is to gather data at activity level using the reporting instructions, explanatory notes, the reporting form, and the TOSSD code list. All of these documents are available at tossd.org. Second, very importantly, the reporting on the SDG focus and the 2 pillars is crucial. The reporting institutions are ultimately responsible for the quality and accuracy of the data reported. They must ensure that activities and expenditures included in their data comply with the eligibility criteria. The Secretariat stands ready to support reporting institutions in these efforts.